Hey guys, welcome to today's lesson. Today we're looking at converting units of measurement. Pretty straightforward, so it's a good chance you're not even going to watch this video, but I thought I might just throw a few things at you. Obviously, we've got lots of different types of measurement conversions, and noticing we are doing measurements. So, things like, weight. We're doing things like time. We might do things to do with data, for example, okay? We could do capacity. These are all different types of measurements. For example, weight could be measured in kilograms, could be measured in grams, could be measured in milligrams, etc. Time, we know, is hours, minutes, and seconds usually. Data, a little bit more challenging. Think about things like terabytes. We're thinking about gigabytes, I'm thinking about megabytes, kilobytes, etc. Okay. Capacity is things like kiloliters, liters, milliliters, etc. You might have a length, of course. That's probably one of the most important ones that we do, like kilometers, like meters, centimeters, and millimeters. Now, one of the things that you might notice in some of these is that you might have some similarities, like kilograms and kiloliters and kilometers. You might have milligrams, we might have milliliters, we might have millimeters. These are what we call prefixes, right? If I go, we got kilobytes here as well. We have millibytes, believe it or not. These are called prefixes, and so they can go with most kind of measurements. And funny enough, they all kind of mean the same thing in terms of, if we're looking at a meter, which is our kind of main measurement, kilometer, kilometer is times 1,000, millimeter is divided by 1,000, where you might go to liters, which is our kind of starting point. Kiloliters is times 1,000, milliliters is divided by 1,000. If we go to grams, which is our common number there, or weight there, then we go kilograms times 1,000, milligrams divided by 1,000. So they're all quite similar. And then you look at things like length, right? And you say, well, hold on, you got centimeters. So why isn't there no centiliters? Well, guess what? You go to Europe, you'll find that they have centiliters. You go buy a bottle of water, it's not going to say 600 mils, it's going to say 60 centiliters, believe it or not. Okay, so the prefixes exist, but sometimes in Australia we don't use all of them, and likewise across the world. I mean, I've never heard anyone really using centigrams. They may do somewhere in the world, but certainly it's not a common thing. So prefixes are important. So what we're kind of looking at is making sure that you know the usual ones. And if I look at let's go length. We've done a lot of this in junior school or year 7, year 8. We're doing things like kilometers, meters, centimeters, and millimeters. And you might do some of these little tables where you've got the flow diagrams, and we're saying kilometers to meters, we're timesing by 1,000, then we're timesing by 100, then we're timesing by 10, and then vice versa. Dividing by 10, dividing by 100, and dividing by 1,000. If we're going from meters directly to millimeters, we're timesing by 100, then timesing by 10, which is timesing by 1,000. That's why things like grams to milligrams, we're dividing by 1,000 or timesing by 1,000, etc. And again, you can interchange that little table there for pretty much all of these measurements. We can put in grams there, make it kilograms, centigrams, milligrams. We can put L in there for liters, kiloliters, milliliters, centiliters. We could even do things such as, think about power. What's power measured in? Or energy. What's energy measured in? You might have heard the word watts. And you can have kilowatts. You can have watts, centawatts, milliwatts, etc. So there's lots of different types of things. You can even do it to bytes for power data, and go kilobytes. Then you can have centibytes and millibytes, etc. So there's all these little things that we can use, and it simply means these times tens, times hundreds, times thousands, and as we go through, you'll kind of work that out. Of course, what we have to really know for my liking, weight's really important. I think capacity is significant because we use that with volume, of course, and of course length. So for me, they're probably the most three important. I should say time, because we do a lot of time questions as well in kind of practical senses. So they're the four really important. Data might be really interesting for you. Okay, now in terms of mathematics, often we kind of have our own version of data because we say that there's 1,000 megabytes in a gigabyte, there's 1,000 gigabytes in a terabyte, but realistically there's actually like 1,024. Okay, but we kind of just round to 1,000 because it's kind of easier. So we use significant figures, I guess you could call it like that. So you might be interested in data, of course, as well. And I have seen in the standard mathematics course, they love talking about watts as well, and doing things like kilowatts because it's about energy, and that's quite in real life scenarios with your bills and electricity, that's quite useful, right? So that's our units of measurement. Later on, when we do things like area measurements, when you're doing things like kilometers squared to meters squared to centimeters squared to millimeters squared, that's really important so that you know those conversions. They're almost the same. Okay, hopefully you might remember this from the Year 9 course, but think about you having a 1 square meter and we want to convert that to centimeters squared. Would you know the answer? If you say 100, you're incorrect. Think about a square meter, right? 1 meter squared, because that's 1 by 1, right? If we put that in terms of centimeters, that's 100 centimeters and 100 centimeters, which means the area of that would be 10,000 centimeters squared. So not 100 at all. Now, when we look at the actual measurement, okay, the distance, yes, we times by 100, but in this case, we times by 100 squared. And that's the same for centimeters squared to millimeters squared, 10 squared, kilometers squared times by 1,000 squared, and vice versa with the divide. When we go to volume, well, we do exactly the same thing, but then we times by 1,000 cubed, 100 cubed, and 10 cubed. That's one of the areas, particularly in Year 10, a lot of boys do struggle with. So when we get to those area questions, it's a good idea to double check to make sure that you understand your capacity conversions, particularly with volume as well as area. That's about it from me today, gents. Hope that made a little bit of sense. We have an introduction for you for converting units of measurements. The next lesson will be important because, it's things that we certainly haven't done much of in the past. Have a good day.